Good morning. Welcome back to the Red Mic. Happy Monday. Hope you're staying warm. Today's Red Mic message, I worked on this a lot to try to keep it as balanced as I can. Please bear that in mind. It's about Minnesota, our rights, and escalation. I want to start off by saying the situation in Minnesota, any way you look at it, it's tragic. A man is dead. A family is grieving, and the public conversation is already hardened into slogans and sides, which means we're at risk of learning nothing. So we need to slow down. Alex Preddy had a constitutional right to be armed. Full stop. But constitutional rights don't exist in isolation. They exist inside systems, under laws enacted by duly elected officials, and alongside our obligations as citizens, especially when law enforcement is involved. The Second Amendment was put in place as a safeguard against tyranny. It was not designed as a tool to personally confront or obstruct the enforcement of laws you disagree with in real time. That distinction matters. Here's what matters also, and this might make some people uncomfortable. Sorry, not sorry. In a chaotic scuffle, a dark object in somebody's hand, even if it turns out to be a phone, can reasonably be perceived as a weapon. An armed individual who resists arrest dramatically increases the risk of a deadly outcome. And being armed while reportedly carrying no identification, well, that adds another layer of uncertainty that compresses decision making and narrows the options for de escalation. None of that means that he deserved to die, but all of it has to be part of an honest after action evaluation. Now, let's talk about the leadership all over, because this is where things really broke down. By the numbers, the scale of protests in Minnesota is disproportionate to the state's actual share of ICE activity. Even with the current surge, estimates are that Minnesota likely accounts for well under 2% of ICE enforcement nationwide. Why is this happening in Minnesota? You don't hear it in Texas. You don't hear it in Florida. You don't hear it in Tennessee. You don't hear it in Oklahoma. You don't hear about this happening anywhere, really, except Minnesota. It appears that local and state leaders surely have played a role in amplifying the response. Rhetoric, public statements, and political signaling can and will escalate tension well beyond what the underlying enforcement numbers would suggest. When leaders frame a localized federal action as a broader confrontation or an invasion, it encourages mobilization, media focus, and sustained protest activity. In that kind of environment, the reaction becomes less about proportionality and more about posture, messaging, and who controls the narrative. When political leaders use hysterical rhetoric, when they frame routine law enforcement as tyranny, when they publicly escalate tension instead of lowering the temperature, they don't just score political points, they change how their citizens behave. And this is really important. When local law enforcement refuses to engage the public interfering with the lawful enforcement of laws, it is a recipe for chaos. We've seen it in Minnesota. That's ground zero. And all of this stuff convinces ordinary people that showing up armed is patriotic resistance rather than a dangerous miscalculation. Leadership is not about pouring gasoline on a volatile situation and then acting shocked when it ignites. Leadership is about responsibility, restraint, and clarity, especially when emotions are high and stakes are real. Here's another really hard truth, and listen to this closely. You can be legally right and still make choices that put your life at risk. You can believe deeply in constitutional freedoms and still recognize that armed confrontation with law enforcement, enforcing the law, is not what those freedoms were designed for. Leaders who blur that line bear responsibility for the consequences. This didn't have to end this way. Rights come with responsibility. Rhetoric has consequences. And escalation, whether by individuals or elected officials, well, that always gets paid for by somebody else. And that's today's Red Mic message. Please give me a like, a follow, and a share. I'll be off current events tomorrow. I love you guys. I'll see you next time. And until next time, Life is painfully short. Drink the bourbon. I'll see you.